name is Manohar. I'm from Sattva Consulting. And the session today, right now, it's going to be very different from the ones you heard in the last 1.5 days. Probably in 2 lines, right? One is what you've been seeing so far is more on the programmatic side, how you use AI for the programs in your organization. This is going to look at the organization dimension, right? How can actually AI address certain organizational efficiency, mainly in the context of knowledge management. So when someone is saying knowledge management system, it is really about that. And knowledge management, I mean, for any organization of a certain size, if you're about 100 people, and I'm sure a lot of organizations here have that size, this is a challenge, right? And it's been, at least been on my mind for quite some time now. I was at SAP for a couple of decades before I came to the sector. And we had a corporate portal, which is an internet, extremely painful to use and search and discover any information over there. Individual teams used to use wikis, Atlassian, Jira, GitHub, and so on to document their stuff. But again, those were islands in themselves, right? And typical enterprise situation where a lot of islands of information data. And so it was very hard to find out who is doing what in the organization. I'm sure you'll be facing that as well. That's the knowledge management problem, right? In fact, in SAP, it was so bad that you had to go to an external conference of SAP, like the one we give to partners and customers, to find out what your neighboring team is actually doing and delivering. Right? But anyway, so now in this sector also, this exists, and in our organizations. So the main problem statement, I mean, the first one I want to start with really is how to make knowledge created, curated by the organization, accessible to everyone, right? Everyone means across the board, not just certain people who have access to information because of their position in the hierarchy, right? Now, I do want to give you a sense of the kind of questions we get in the Slack channel at Sattva. Sattva, by the way, is a consulting firm. We do a lot of projects through the year. I think in a year, we run more than 100 projects. And the projects could be, research, consulting, impact assessment, a lot of these projects, right? And we are a 15-year-old organization, 350 people around. So the kind of questions you see is, in which projects have you worked in primary education? Who has a certain kind of expertise, right, working with the government? With which clients have you worked in a certain sector? Have you worked with a specific client? Which project? What capacity? Do we have any contacts in a specific organization? Have we implemented any kind of projects? Any study on this, and so on? So if you look at these things that are highlighted, those are some entities, right, that are relevant for us as an organization. I'm sure in your organization, those entities could be different. But there are entities and there are certain dimensions around those entities, right? So for us, the entities, project is at the center, right? For every project, there are some employees in the project, you do it for a client, there's a partner, and each project creates some assets, right? And there are these dimensions, business unit, sector, subsectors, and so on. So the questions span these two. And for us, and I'm sure this is not an uncommon issue, the entities in a different location, all these information is spread in silos. Some entities are in multiple places. And the other point is, how do you label all these entities across dimension? Some of you might already be thinking ahead, AI hai to we don't actually need to label, it'll just pick it up and so on. Not so simple, as we'll learn a little later. Now, our landscape is a little bit like this. So we use Slack, Coda. Coda is like Notion. I'm not sure if you've heard of this. ClickUp for the project management, NetSuite for our finance projects, Keka for HR. We have a data warehouse built on Snowflake and a couple of internal SaaS solutions. But primarily, we are a Google shop. We use Google Workspace, right? Now, if this is our landscape, so basically our problem becomes, how do you search for any information, knowledge, which actually could be spread across these systems? And you actually want to look for these entity types across those dimensions, right? So that's in a nutshell our knowledge management problem. I'm sure your landscape could be different, your entity types could be different, but at a certain abstraction level, this is the knowledge management challenge, right? Now, there's another angle to this, which is the whole knowledge life cycle, right? You start with knowledge creation, and it gets stored somewhere, and then it needs to be consumed or distributed to certain people. So any knowledge management system actually needs to cover these phases of the life cycle. That is important, and we'll see how certain decisions, if it's not taken in an integrated way, that can affect the overall usage of the system. Now, for us, first thing is, of course, we need to cover these entities, spanning structured, unstructured information across systems. This is an important point. How do you capture knowledge at the source, at the point of creation, right? And not later, because you could say, okay, knowledge creation hota hai, baad mein we put it into some central system and so on. That doesn't work, and we'll give you a good example of that. Third, it must enable consumption also where really work happens, right? Again, that's the ideal thing. So meet the user where they are. If they are on WhatsApp, meet them on WhatsApp. If they're on Slack, meet them on Slack, and so on. That's another point as well. Instead of pulling them to a central system, right? Must factor in access control. Very, very important, because again, organizations will have confidential data. You don't want it to be accessible to everybody. So a knowledge management system, if you're building something on top, it must factor in this as well. And for us, and for all of you, I'm sure, it needs to be cost effective as well, right? Yet another SaaS solution which adds a per user cost to your already existing per user cost is not really ideal. So let's keep this in mind. Before I come to the nice, cool AI part, I want to take you through a journey on how we've tried to solve this problem and what kind of things have worked, what hasn't worked, and so on. So now, when I joined Sattva about 4.5 years back, we already had a solution. It's a custom-built KM solution called KNO. It was designed and architected by somebody who had come in from BCG and he had some experience in Bain and so on. So if you know some of these large consulting firms, they have knowledge, custom-built knowledge management solution. They have the resources to build very sophisticated solution. And he said, okay, that's what a consulting organization needs. So let's build this, right? I want to give you a quick preview of how this looks. Now, you can search, but again, you look at all these things, right? Employee, projects, assets, and so on. Now, if you search for projects, yeah, you come here and you can look at a specific project. Right. So now this project screen, are you able to see it? Right. So you see that this particular project has a certain description, has some file names, has also the team who's worked on this project, right? Which sector it belongs to, right? The description, of course, and there are certain things around service lines, right? Now, it's all interconnected. So if you want to say, okay, Tanya was a team member over here, you can go and look at Tanya's profile, you know, her previous work, what she's done, and certain projects that she's worked in, and so on, right? That's the whole integrated thing, and you can look at certain of these documents. Now it's all over here. It's an inbuilt PDF viewer and things like that. Now, for the consumers, and by the way, that's the inertia of legacy software, right? It's still in use. People are still using this. Now, all the information had to be uploaded over here, right? At the beginning of the project, when the project gets created, someone comes and creates a project, creates a description, adds these people manually into the system, right? And then when a particular project is ending or a certain point of time, you want to create a deliverable, you come and upload the deliverable or link to the Google Drive and so on. Everything in one place, but you can imagine how tricky it was to get all that information together in this one system. Right? So, but okay, I'll just come back to the slides. So, the governance was done in a very strict way. We had KNO champions in every business unit, and there was a weekly call, right? All the project leads uploading data over here and so on. And that was very rigorously followed. And of course, there would be slippages because, time pressures, you don't do it and so on, right? So there's always a push to keep the system up to date, not the best of architectures. So that was one part. From the consumption point of view, it doesn't look into the documents. Again, it relies a lot on the metadata that you add. So when you create a project, you say it belongs to this sector, it belongs to this kind of a client, and so on. You need to map all those things over here. And this was a custom solution, a lot of tech debt. We are not a tech first company. I mean, we outsource engineering. It was not easy to maintain this at all. But at the same time, remember that this had an interesting knowledge graph embedded in it, right? So all those entities and the relationships were there in the repository, because of which the consumption, you could navigate from a project, you can go to the team members, from the team members you can say, okay, which other project the person has worked in, etc. and so on. Very nice navigation possibilities, but that came at a cost, right? So yeah, so this was KNO, and we try to keep this up to date, but again, a lot of struggle, right? So what is the alternative? So we were a Google shop, we were using Google, Google search was there, but there was also something called Slapdash, which we discovered. They call themselves a universal search solution. It's like a one bar, which it had some connectors, and then you can just search in one place. It'll search across Drive, across Coda, across ClickUp, and so on. Incidentally, ClickUp acquired them, and then they integrated that into the solution. It stopped being an independent solution anyone can use, right? Glean, you might have heard of Glean. Anyone has heard of Glean over here? It's actually, we talked to them a couple of years ago, but not so strong. Now they call themselves, again, agentic AI-based knowledge management solution. They have a lot more connectors, but again, this is another system which talks to many systems in the landscape, indexes all that data, brings it in, and so on. And of course, it costs a lot, right? So we've explored this. At that time, it didn't even have so many connectors. So we were trying out a couple of these options. I know that Project Tech4Dev is using Dancer, and now it's called Onyx, right? So I'm sure you'll have some experience as well about what is the reach of something like that. So there are quite a few of these third-party knowledge management solutions which are out there. In the meantime, when we're still struggling, thinking about, okay, how do we solve this problem, right? All those questions because in the end, those questions didn't stop, right? In Slack, we always, every day, keep getting those questions, and it had to be somebody in the organization who knew, and he or she could answer, right? So it's all tacit knowledge in the minds of people. People leave, then what happens to the knowledge, right? And for any knowledge organization, this becomes so important. One of the things we did in the meantime was we ran this org-wide initiative to get everything into a shared drive. Massive project, because everybody was just storing files on their laptops or on the Google so-called My Drive, which is local to them, right? Which is not reachable, you can't. So we had to have policies around, okay, if it's on My Drive, you can't even share it to anybody, right? You say share on Google. So we had to institute policies like that. We had to govern this entire migration to a common shared drive kind of structure. And that took about 1.5 years. And if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't be where we are today with respect to building an AI layer on top, right? And I said 350 members in the organization, you can imagine. So we had to do this, and this is great. Good baseline. But along with this, again, all the access control. There's one example of a business unit. We said, okay, there are certain teams inside the business unit, and there are certain folders that you create. Who has access to what? Well, leadership has access to everything. But if you're somebody working on delivery, you have only access to those folders, right? So these things were defined and then implemented in the specific folder structure that was created, right? Access control was very, very important. And we gave some guidelines as well, right? So again, principle of minimum visibility, you make sure that you give access to only the things that you need based on your role and so on. So once this was done, then of course, the Google Drive search, which was there even before LLM, that helped a little bit to find out, but this is still related to that particular business unit, right? Enter LLMs, right? So when this came, we were excited because, okay, thought, finally, is there something which can actually address our knowledge management problem in a solid way? So first thing is, of course, these tools started offering bots. Right? When we saw this, the first thing they do is SaaS solution offer a chatbot interface, right? Slack, Coda, ClickUp, and so on. And but of course, we realized that beyond a certain trial version, they said, okay, there's a markup of the price. Not surprising. but that was also not the best option for us. Again, everybody's using Slack. We want to move to the next tier of Slack. It's quite expensive, right? So we said, okay, we'll have to see which ones we prioritize. But then the other thing we did, and this is where it gets interesting. We started, by the way, Notebook LM. How many of you have not heard of Notebook LM? Good, okay. Most of you have heard, and if you've used it, you realize what a wonderful, wonderful product it is, right? It's one of the best we've seen to be built on top of the LLMs today and general purpose. It's fantastic. So we got these domain experts. We had an agri practice area lead. We had a health practice area lead who made sure that all the documents related to a particular area was put into a notebook, right? If I now close this, yeah. So this is, oh no, this is not the one. Yeah, this is the health bot, which has all the health related work that we have done. And this is not secondary research, by the way. This is all the work done by Sattva and in the projects that we do, right? All that was put together in a notebook. And of course, if you create a notebook, you can of course chat with it. I'm not going to go to that, but interesting thing is you also, for somebody who's getting into this area, you get a sense of, okay, how does the whole healthcare landscape look like, right? And if you look at certain things, digital health, you have all these things, and it connects back. I don't know if you've seen some of these features over here. You want to dig a little deeper into specific area, it creates a question, and then the bot answers based on the sources that you have over here, right? So for people interested in a specific domain, this is proven to be very, very interesting, useful, good starting point. But again, there are limitations because, again, I come back to the point about manually adding all this information into the notebook to keep it up to date, right? That's the health bot. We also have a similar agri bot. Again, something similar over there. So now we started creating these kind of notebooks, right? And it was useful to a certain extent, but we also tried to see how the adoption is. The analytics are not very good in Notebook LM, in the enterprise version. But the other thing is, again, this is something which is not integrated into wherever they are. You have to go to a notebook, right? So that's also a challenge. And especially if it's just very occasional, then that's not very good from the engagement point of view. But what we learned is that, we can build, we started experimenting with Gemini, we can build a solid KM system using Gemini, right? So we said, we're going to try to build a Sattva-wide KM system using some of these tenets. First thing is, anchor this on Google shared drives, right? And use files as the main entity which contains the information which can then be indexed and used and so on. First, leverage Google offerings before you go for any kind of specialized KM solutions, because we were a Google shop, and if something can come natively out of Google, it comes out of the box, nothing like it. And by the way, interestingly, Google for us, we use the enterprise version plan of Google. And initially they said there's going to be a markup of the price because of the AI features, and then they pulled back and said no. So we stay on the existing enterprise plan of Google, and we're getting all those KM features, and I'm going to demo that to you on Google in the same enterprise plan itself. The other important part is we have to automate processes. If you remember the life cycle that I talked about, if it's again manual, then that's going to hit where knowledge is created, stored, and so on. If you don't automate those processes, one simple example is when a project is created, right? This project folder structure needs to be automatically created, right? So that people don't have to go and create that structure and then manually add files and so on. So how can we do some of these things? Access control is important. Also demonstrating the value, right? If people have to still follow some of these processes, they need to understand what are the value that's coming out of this, right? So we have to build business unit specific use cases because each business unit had its own kind of use cases there, and they were wondering, okay, why should I do this? What are the benefits for me and so on, typical. Right, I want to just give you a sense of this, and this is where hopefully the magic kicks in. Yeah, so now before I put this in, I want to show you, so this is Gemini, And in Gemini, there is this interesting capability where you can select a certain scope. Now this scope is your Google Workspace and all the connected apps. So if you're using Gemini as the LLM internally in the organization, you're doing all kinds of work over there. Every day you maybe go there a few times. So this is the place you can also look for search in the context that you want to look at, find information. So let's say I want to look at something in Google Drive, and I'm putting a thing saying, can you give me the names of people in Sattva who have worked on the beacon protocol, right? So enter, it's thinking, let's give it a few more. Next one, and I'm going to start a few in parallel so that we don't lose time. Can you summarize the collaboration we from Sattva have had with Project Tech4Dev? Who are the key people from Tech4Dev we have engaged with and in what context? Let's try this. Next. Give me the list of projects we've done in the livelihood sector. For each project, list the client and brief nature of engagement. Sort this list in reverse chronological order. And then finally, something more simple, but also something which we deal with in our organization. Summarize Sattva's travel policy. Right? You want to go to the internet, find something, but you want to find out about that. So let's see if some of these things have come back. Oops. Yeah. Let's zoom in a bit. So it says, okay, based on the documents, here are people who worked on the beacon protocol, on related projects. These are the names of people, teams working on ONDC, Open Digital Network, yeah, and also WDE. Now, interestingly, the sources, where does it pick it up from? So all this is on Drive, right? We've just stored these documents in Drive. It's able to look into these documents and say, okay, these are the people working on it. And then, so we actually didn't feed in this information anywhere that these are the people working on this compared to the KNO system that you remember, right? So, but it's able to find out over here. So now this, I can just look at this particular document, get to know a little bit more the details over here. This is a contract, interesting. So from that also it's able to pick up. I have a little bit more of a slightly higher level of access. So yeah, I can get to get the benefits of giving a more compelling demo, but otherwise, you will not be able to see some of the documents from finance and so on. Right, so this is this one. You can have follow-up questions. Now let's look at this. Can you summarize the collaboration? Now let's look at this. What does it say? Project Tech4Dev, right? Okay, so yeah, we've had some interaction on how we can also plug in the fractional CXO in some of the clients that we are working with. That was one. IPN, there have been some knowledge sharing sessions from Project Tech4Dev, that comes up over here. We are using Glyphic in IPN, so that also comes up over here. AI Impact Summit, there we are. So we're collaborating with Project Tech4Dev on this, so this comes up too. We did give a session, Erica is here, on fund assist to Erica, so that was another thing. So it's picking up all these things. Key people, Anto, Erica, Vinod, Ashna, Logo, Thomas, Devi, Sheetal was there at that time, right? So yes, so you're getting a sense of what this is able to do, right? We've not built anything custom. We've just followed a certain policy that these projects are there in. By the way, I had to mention that over here, the context that I gave was Google Drive and Gmail, okay? So that's important. It also looks into Gmail. And one very interesting thing is you can run deep research on your Gmail, on your Google Drive in a certain context, in a certain space, and it will give you a very detailed report on a project that you've done in the past. And that's also very, very powerful. Let's look at the next one. List of projects that we've done in the livelihood space, livelihoods panel, who was a client, there was an Sambhav Foundation, Anaha Trust, and all these things, right? So all these sources are there. You can take a look at this and access those things, provided, of course, you have access, right? And then the final one was Sattva's travel policy, okay? So key objectives, expense categories, and so on. Now, the way we used to manage this before was we would create a nice page which would describe the boarding policy in an easily consumable way, right? You don't need to do that. It's just a query away, right? You can just ask a question and it just comes, right? And that's the beauty of this. So you're getting a sense of the potential over here. There's another example which I want to give is using Notebook LM, right? And this is a little special also because, again, it addresses a very specific use case. SBA is Sustainable Business Advisory. That's one of the business units. And there, people have to create proposals for clients, right? And I'm sure nonprofits also have to create proposals from time to time. And what we did was, again, after they arranged all the projects in a certain folder structure, proposals are all created in a certain way. And we just linked those things. It's not added as a PDF. It's just linked to the specific Google Drive. And here, you can come, let's say you're preparing a proposal, and I've given that question over here saying, I'm creating a proposal on energy for an impact fund. What are some of the proposals we've created in the related area, right? And then it just goes through this, and because I have the history of proposals that this team, this unit has created over the last couple of years, so it's able to give me very concrete feedback on, okay, this is what we've done. If you're interested, okay, take a look at this. And here, if I select something, it just goes to that particular proposal and I can see, okay, what was done over here, what can I reuse and so on, right? And that's exactly what the teams need. Something has been done in the past, I don't want to redo it, I want to learn from the experience that has been done. So if it's there at my fingertips when I'm creating a proposal, nothing like it, right? So this is another thing, and the team is using this very actively, so that's been a good success. Of course, this is limited to that particular notebook. But because the use case is very, very clear and every week somebody or the other is working on a proposal, this is a great place to go to, right? So roughly the way we're thinking about this is have Google Shared Drive as the central place. Project files I showed you is already in there and more it's coming in. We want to build connectors to these other systems that we have so that, and by the way, there is an API and you can build connectors to connect all this data into the Google Workspace, right? And then of course there are Notebook LM based on some of these contexts for specific users, create notebooks, roll that out, and they have access to that too. And that's of course manual. Now there's one very interesting thing over here which is mentioned at the bottom, which is AI generated labels. I want to spend, before we come to that, just bookmark that. I'll come to the labels part a little bit. So the other thing is we talked about creation and storage, and now we have a certain process of how to govern the creation and storage. Distribution, we've seen so far, you can go to Gemini, ask questions, fine. But there's another aspect to distribution. Why should I go and ask? Why can't I be informed about something that's interesting, that's happening, right? Now, here's where, I don't know if you've seen this, but they recently announced Flow. So this interface is available on Google. I can give you a demo, but in principle, you can. It's a bit like a Zapier-like interface where you have all these steps, and the steps can be connected to a certain action. But unlike Zapier, which actually you need a kind of API call to trigger a particular step, right, or a web call that you can insert. Here, as you can see, you can enter a prompt, right? You can enter a prompt and says, okay, every day, and you can schedule. I say summarize the latest updates from the Water Data Exchange project of Sattva and send it to me, or you can say send it to your team, and so on, right? So what this does is, and you can test it before you put it live. So I get a mail like this, neatly summarized. These are the things happening on this project, right? So knowledge, again, coming back to this point over here, distribution is also a challenge if, you say everybody has to go and find information, right? Can we distribute it to the people? So periodically, can we send the leadership updates on certain projects or a full list of projects? Last month, mein kya projects start kiya humne, right? So if you can send that, that will be great. So that's our target as well, how we can actually automate the distribution of knowledge as well. That's the other angle to this, right? Okay. By the way, they have a list of connectors and more are coming, but we can also create custom connectors as well. So our bet that we use Google as the anchor, Gemini as the anchor, integrate more of these apps into Google Workspace and use Gemini as the point where you can query, right? Yeah, so that's a bet that we're having. Hopefully we'll get more of these. Right, so there are building blocks. We need a baseline layer, which is structured information assets, processes. And by the way, these processes are also important, right? We've again gone to the business unit saying we need one Spock from you who's making sure that the folder structure is defined, right? Making sure that these folders, the files are stored in this. And there is some automation, of course, but still needs governance. So there's the non-tech aspect of it, which is very important. We have the baseline, build on the baseline with some knowledge-specific bots, use case-specific things, and also Google Flow. We want to get to is a unified search, and that's going to take some time. But there are other limitations also. I'll come to that in a minute. Now, Google Workspace also allows you to classify. Now, if you remember my first slide, I talked about these different dimensions. How do you label this key? This is this kind of a file. This is a proposal kind of file, or this belongs to this sector, and so on, right? Now, if you manually have to add this, not ideal. At the same time, is Gemini able to pick up everything? So you saw the queries. It was very interesting, right? So I said livelihood project dikhao, and it gave me a list of livelihood projects. We found that it's not complete. It doesn't pick up all the livelihood projects. It is not complete, right? And the reason it's not complete is, it's looking into it, linking into each file, and it has a certain way of extrapolating that, okay, this could be a livelihood project and so on, right? Maybe it looks, but that can get stronger if we say, attach certain labels to it and you train this, right? So you can create a model, train the model, turn it on. Now, we've started on this journey. For example, people have gone through, about 178 proposal files and given it a label proposal and said, okay, Gemini, if it's this kind of file is proposal so that you can train, but it needs at least 200 to get trained a little bit more on this, right? And a few other examples. But if you do this, right, if you have this baseline of enough number, and by the way, this is not LLM, right? It's classical AI machine learning. If you can do that, then, when somebody creates a particular document and so on, the system should automatically label it. And if it labels it, then when you go to Gemini and search, it will pick it up because it's labeled a proposal or it's labeled agri sector and so on, right? So very early stages, but this is one current disadvantage that we have, that it is not complete, and we'll have to see how we address this. Okay, how well is this working? So we ran a pilot, about 100 users to see, because we want to see how this is working. Average rating still middling. They like to know how I can check if Sattva has done similar engagements, quick search, access to research questions, and so on. There are certain data coverage because not all data has been migrated to this structure. Search accuracy, for the reason I mentioned, right? It's not complete, so that's been some issue. And also, how do you prompt, right? That's also kind of a change management thing. So if I give a very simple statement, expect a great result, that also doesn't happen. Right? So we're working on some of these things, but it's important for us to see, okay, if you're rolling out a solution, keep getting the feedback on what's working, what isn't. Now, so what we've done so far is state drive structures. We've aligned that. We've done some automated folder creation, some SOPs on maintenance of this has been defined, and people are using it within Gemini Notebook, Google Flow. We're just starting with Google Flow-based automation. Hopefully that will also become more as we move along. So what's next? We want to capture more metadata at the point of project creation, saying, okay, this project is for some of these things. And at the same time, also see how we can integrate. By the way, Gemini also supports a knowledge graph, and that we need to integrate that. So for example, if I collect people information from Keka and bring it into Gemini, and I can link it up to a knowledge graph, and then Gemini can give much better responses to queries because it's able to navigate the entities in the graph, and also it's faster, right? So that's another piece. So we want to build connectors as well. And then the other way around, right? A lot of work happens on Slack. So how can we, enable people to say, okay, on Slack, I can say add Gemini and give a Gemini query, and I'm able to get that, right? So all the Slack groups, they get access to it as well. And the other angle is I have access right now because my level of access control is pretty lenient. But otherwise, how do we enable certain kinds of folders from each project, which is not client confidential, to be accessible to others as well, right? So that's another piece. And there, it's not just about people querying, but also how do you distribute it? How do you say that, okay, hey, you're working on this project. Can we build an engine which says, okay, here are some other projects in a related area that have happened in the last 6 months. So that's the vision we want to get to. Before we close, I want to just briefly, how much time do I have? Right, 5 more minutes. So knowledge is one, right? So making access to knowledge possible. So you can go and search for all these documents that have been created and so on. What about insights? So I've done 10 projects in the livelihood space or agri space. What have we as an organization learned from it? What are those insights? How can we create those insights? Now, we don't know yet, but we hope that, if something like this was possible, then we could offer clients. I know Quest Alliance has been a client of Sattva in the past. There has been some others as well. So every time anybody becomes a client of Sattva or managing a certain account, they get access to a portal, which is a client knowledge portal, right? Where you get to see, the resolution is not very good, but anyway, the number of engagements that you had in the past, active projects, geographies, how many beneficiaries you've reached. There's a portfolio map, and then, okay, partnership timelines. So this is very basic. Something around, okay, these are the projects you've run in the past. And this, by the way, is from a donor perspective, right? Let's say there's a CSR donor and they work with Sattva, right? So on education, you run some of these things. This is a Sattva team that worked with you. And by the way, you don't have to go to your emails to look for certain kinds of information. It's all over here. So you get it all at one place. But here comes the interesting part. Insights. So you've been a CSR donor and we've been helping you. And over the last 4 years, yes. So this is how your CSR budget has grown, right? And how does it compare, with the sector and so on. So, don't look at the consistency of the data. It's all dummy data, but you get the essence of it. Right? And okay, how many NGO partners have you worked with? How has that evolved over the years? How has the budget of those NGO partners evolved over the years and so on? And then, of course, you can look at also the number of beneficiaries, how has that grown and so on, right? Now, this is based on your project data. Let's say you're a donor, right? It gets interesting when, and that's where the knowledge engine comes in. Can we do something like this? Insights from other CSR projects. So every year we work with about 300 to 400 nonprofits in the context of CSR, right? Now, we have this data. It's just lying around somewhere, right? So median cost of STEM education program for covering this. They ask us, right? So, hey, some nonprofit has come and given me a proposal on this. Is this reasonable? Right? It's very difficult currently for us to find out. But if you can do that, what are the per beneficiary cost of a livelihood project spanning 18 months, right? Average, right? Average admin cost. That could be interesting. That's one kind of insight that I talked about. Insights from, okay, you are running a digital literacy program, but we've run, maybe a dozen others. What have been some insights? What has worked? What hasn't worked, right? Some of those things we can share over there. We also want to see how, there's simply too much of secondary data and AI generated content out there. But where we can add more value is if experts from our side can curate and create some of these, insights tailored to specific sets of clients. And this is not AI generated. This is, Debaranjan is our agri practice lead. Lakshmi is our, health lead and so on. She's able to look at the previous projects and we're able to channel this kind of insights also towards clients, right? And we don't want this only to be a system where, you have to come, you can select the themes you're interested in. So, and you get notified, right? Every couple of months, or you can define the frequency. You get a custom notification, email with the insights from other Sattva projects and so on, right? But to get to that, we really have to crack this insights piece. And I mean, I wanted to start getting the whole organization excited about what is possible if we do that before starting to say, okay, we need to initiate a project about, generating all these insights, right? So that was just a sneak peek of that. So last slide. So for AI to work, we need well-defined storage structure, access control, SOPs, automated process, very, very important, because otherwise you don't have a base to build on, right? That's very key, most difficult part. For us, this is showing a lot of promise, right? Office Suite, which is Google Workspace. But we also feel that for it to be completely accurate, it needs to be complemented by structured metadata, be it a knowledge graph, or something that we can inject into this, because purely based on documents, there's going to be limitation. It won't be complete. Then we also believe that if we can create this internal knowledge engine, then those insights can be very, very useful for both internally, our consultants when they reach out customers, and also customers themselves. Okay, that was it. Thank you. Do we have time? Where's the Ashna, the timekeeper? Questions? Or we can also, chat. I would love to hear some of your experiences too, the kind of systems and solutions that you have tried, and we should keep the conversation going.
Are there any questions?
Just one clarifying.
Yes.
This statement here, the AI-based AI solution is to be complemented with the structure metadata. How does this sit against the additional stats classification that you're going to make there? Why is that not sufficient? Or how is that different from this?
You mean the KNO system?
No. Oh. You had said, right, that Google now has a classification capability of annotating documents.
Yeah. So in fact, some of the metadata we'll be able to capture using the classification, right? Some others, we will need. For example, simple things like the project creator, project name. I mean, some of these structured data is sitting in the project master, so to speak, right? And that's not going to be picked up by any labeling. Labeling you can do to find out certain things from the content itself, right? Something which is beyond the content, we need to have some system which captures that manually, or let's say in an automated way, but it has to be added to the system.
Do you know any non-profit licensing implications this has if one has to move to this model? Because Google is free for non-profits, but the moment you go into this model, they move you to a licensing model. So do you have any insight about that right now?
So we are on an enterprise plan. In fact, I was just double checking with my colleague yesterday. We pay about 12,000 per user per year, right? And we get the entire suite. And of course, it could be because it's a slightly long-term commitment. We might have got a discounted rate and so on, but entire suite, right? And even these next generation, or let's say preview features around flows and so on. So yeah, I don't know if that helps.
Non-profits pay zero, right?
Oh, for Google, is it?
For Google, all of it, those who signed up. So if there is like an AI model on top of that,
Right.
I don't know if non-profit
Get access to this.
license offers that. So I was just checking if
Right.
you know anything about the non-profit licensing against the features that you demo.
Right.
Is it only for enterprise? My sense is it might be just for for enterprise, not for
Correct.
the
But
non-profit. Yes, but the Gemini integration with shared, it is top up to so it means basically you upgrade your existing to a paid account.
correct. Yeah, I mean that's the trade-off, right? So do we go in for another solution like Glean, or I heard you people are using Notion, right? Or do we bake something into the Office suite itself? Okay. Yes, Yangraj.
You mentioned about knowledge creation and storage and then
Distribution and consumption, yeah.
So do you use any tools to ensure that quality data is getting ingested into the knowledge management system?
So the question was, do we use any tools to ensure that quality data is being ingested? So probably the most important thing are the finished deliverables, right? So if it's a work in progress document, that's not so relevant. So we've created the folder structure in such a way that there are clearly demarcated sections for finished deliverables, which is relevant for either within the team or beyond the team. And the Spock in that team ensures that those folders contains the finished deliverable, and that's what gets picked up.
The folder structure has to be aligned across all the teams, like they have to use the same.
No, within a business unit. So every business unit has their specific use cases, and we're working with them. And there are certain best practices we suggest, but then they need to have the flexibility saying, okay, we organize ourselves in this way, and this structure makes sense for us.
And if there are like documents which are shared across teams, then how does that work?
That has to come into a kind of common thing, or we make sure that that's placed in a folder where Sattva all access is there. Right? So then everybody, which means Gemini, anyone using Gemini also will pick that up.
There was a slide just before the demo slide. Can you please go back to that?
There were two demo slides, but maybe because this one. Before the first demo slide? Or this one?
Yeah, this one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the third point, which is automate all processes related to knowledge creation and storage. I wanted to understand how that works. When we say automate all processes, are we saying, what does that entail? Can you give me an example?
Right. So let's say we get a new project, right? And a project is created in a CRM system. Right? So today what happens is, somebody creates a project in the CRM system and then sends a mail to somebody and says, okay, project shuru ho gaya hai, right? You can start. And that somebody would go and create some folder somewhere and so on. Right? So how can we have some of these triggers? And that trigger leads to certain automated steps. Right? We're trying to look at the end-to-end life cycle of projects. Same thing with proposal as well. Right? When we know that a proposal has started and it goes through certain phases, then immediately the proposal-related folder should be created. And also maybe they get a mail saying that, hey, by the way, you're working on a proposal. Here's a notebook, right, which will help you refine this proposal and so on. Right? So some of those things as well. Yeah.
The processes are defined by us, and
Yeah.
the system kind of just prompts the user every time they go on to create a new folder structure or a project or anything, saying that this is or it automatically creates like a template and the person.
It creates in some cases even the templates are automatically put into the folder structure also. So we've created a very simple way to you enter a project name. Right now it's more script-based automation. It creates, for some business units who have finalized the structure, it creates the structure and also, come a common place, puts the templates and so on, so that they can just get started working on it.